Teleological altruism, from human flourishing to evolutionary finality. Altruism is traditionally framed as a moral commitment to improving the well-being of others. Whether expressed through charity, redistribution, or ethical duty, most altruistic systems evaluate actions by their effects on individuals, reducing suffering, increasing happiness, or promoting fairness. However, once a fixed end state is introduced, an ultimate goal that defines what success means, altruism can be restructured into something far more directional. Teleological altruism represents this shift, an ethical framework in which all actions are judged by their contribution to a final outcome, rather than by their immediate effects on individuals. In this case, that outcome is the production of a perfect evolutionary being, and all moral weight is derived from contributions toward that end. This framework contrasts sharply with traditional approaches such as utilitarianism, particularly as articulated by thinkers like Peter Singer. In classical and effective altruism, the goal is to maximize well-being across individuals. Even when extended into long-termist thinking, where future lives are given moral consideration, the structure remains fundamentally person-centered. Individuals, whether present or future, are the units of value, and their welfare is what is being optimized. Teleological altruism departs from this by redefining the unit of value itself. Individuals are no longer the primary locus of moral concern. Instead, they are instrumental components in a larger evolutionary process. Their value is derived from their contribution to the trajectory toward the PEB. This transforms altruism from a system that distributes concern across people into one that allocates resources toward the most productive pathways to a defined end. However, this shift introduces an important insight. The appearance of teleological altruism depends heavily on the time horizon. Over very short time frames, teleological altruism can resemble self-interest. Individuals who act to maximize their productivity, knowledge, and survival are simultaneously increasing their contribution to the PEB. Their personal advancement is not separate from the moral system, it is a local manifestation of it. What appears as self-interested behavior is, in this framework, aligned with a global objective. The distinction between self-interest and altruism begins to collapse, as both are subsumed under the same teleological criterion: contribution to evolutionary progress. At slightly longer time horizons, teleological altruism begins to resemble what might be called human flourishing. If humanity is currently the only known carrier of the traits necessary to produce the PEB, then the survival and advancement of the human species becomes instrumentally critical. Safeguarding civilization, advancing technology, and expanding beyond existential bottlenecks, such as planetary limits or stellar lifespans, are not merely beneficial in a humanitarian sense. They are necessary steps in the construction of the PEB. Efforts to mitigate global risks, develop spacefaring capabilities, or accelerate scientific discovery all appear, at this level, as investments in the continuation and expansion of humanity. Thus, teleological altruism can look like a commitment to the flourishing of the human race, even though this is not its final objective but rather an essential intermediate condition. Only when viewed at the longest time horizon does the true structure of teleological altruism become clear. Humanity itself is not the end goal but a transitional phase, an evolutionary substrate carrying partial traits of the PEB. Each individual, group, or population contributes fragments: genetic traits, cognitive structures, cultural knowledge, and technological capabilities. These fragments are subject to selection, refinement, and recombination through both biological and non-biological processes. The PEB, in this sense, is not a single individual in the conventional sense, but the culmination of an evolutionary process that integrates and optimizes these contributions. This perspective fundamentally alters how moral weight is assigned. In traditional altruism, there is often an implicit symmetry. Each individual's welfare counts, sometimes equally, sometimes with adjustments. In teleological altruism, moral weight becomes proportional to expected contribution. Agents who are more productive in advancing the trajectory toward the PEB carry greater significance, not because they are intrinsically more valuable, but because they are more causally relevant to the final outcome. This introduces a meritocratic allocation of concern, grounded not in subjective preference, but in objective contribution to a defined goal. The economic implications follow directly. Systems that allocate resources based on need or equality may be effective for certain humanitarian objectives, but they are not optimized for maximizing evolutionary productivity. Teleological altruism instead aligns with a system that distributes capital and decision-making power according to demonstrated and expected productivity. In this context, evolutionary capitalism emerges as a compatible mechanism, a system in which markets function not merely as aggregators of preferences, but as selection processes that identify and amplify the most effective contributors to long-term progress. This also resolves certain tensions present in utilitarian and long-termist frameworks. When the number of future lives becomes vast, traditional utility calculations can become unstable or indeterminate. By anchoring value to a specific outcome, the PEB, teleological altruism reframes these calculations. Actions are evaluated not by how they balance competing utilities across populations, but by how they influence the probability, speed, and quality of reaching the final state. The moral calculus becomes a problem of optimization under uncertainty, rather than aggregation of subjective experiences. Importantly, teleological altruism does not deny that suffering, happiness, or fairness matter in practice. Rather, it reinterprets them as signals or constraints within the broader optimization process. Reducing suffering may be valuable insofar as it preserves or enhances productive capacity. Increasing well-being may be valuable insofar as it enables greater innovation or cooperation. These considerations are not ends in themselves, but instrumental factors that feed into the larger objective. In this way, teleological altruism unifies ethics and strategy. It removes the distinction between what is morally right and what is instrumentally effective, collapsing both into alignment with a single trajectory. At short timescales, it appears as self-interest, at medium scales as human flourishing, and at the longest scale as the directed evolution toward a perfect evolutionary being. What begins as altruism toward others ultimately becomes alignment with the only outcome that matters within the system, the realization of evolutionary finality.